In a Denver electronics store, a blind Marine veteran was about to face discrimination that would trigger a federal investigation. What started as laptop shopping took a shocking turn when the manager banned his service dog. James Carter wasn't your typical customer. For 8 years, he had served in Afghanistan, known for his determination. When he encountered Cooper being refused entry, he was walking into a civil rights battle. What began as one shopping trip would become a landmark case that transformed corporate America forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Saturday afternoon rush at Park Meadows Mall hit like a familiar wave, predictable, relentless, and somehow still overwhelming. Jim Carter felt the press of bodies around him, heard the cacophony of voices blending into white noise, smelled the mixture of food court grease and department store perfume. His hand found Cooper's harness, and immediately the world settled into manageable proportions. "Easy day, boy," he murmured, and felt the German shepherd's steady breathing beneath his palm. 3 years of navigating the world without sight had taught Jim to read the subtle language of Cooper's body, the slight tension that meant crowds, the relaxed gait that signaled clear pathways, the focused alertness that said working. Tech World. Electronics sat at the mall's north end, past the jewelry stores and clothing boutiques that Ryan had described in careful detail during their reconnaissance trip last week. Jim's nephew had mapped every storefront, every bench, every potential obstacle between the parking garage and their destination. The kid understood that independence required preparation, even if he didn't always understand why his uncle insisted on doing these things alone. The automatic doors whispered open, and Jim caught the electronic hum that meant serious business. Servers, displays, the quiet symphony of expensive technology. Cooper's pace remained steady as they crossed the threshold, his service dog vest, announcing their purpose to anyone who cared to notice. "Excuse me, sir." The voice carried authority, wrapped in customer service politeness. Jim paused, letting Cooper settle beside him. "Yes? I'm Derek Walsh, store manager." A pause, and Jim could feel the man's eyes taking inventory. "I'm afraid we have a strict no-pets policy here at Tech World." Jim's jaw tightened almost, imperceptibly. In the 3 years since Cooper had entered his life, he'd faced this challenge dozens of times. Each incident followed a familiar script, though the actors changed. "This is Cooper, my service dog. He's protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Sir, I understand your situation, but our insurance doesn't cover animals. In the store, liability issues, you understand. There's a pet store down the corridor that might—" "Cooper isn't a pet." Jim's voice carried the measured calm of someone who'd learned to choose battles carefully. "He's a medical aid, same as a wheelchair or hearing aid. Are you familiar with ADA regulations regarding service animals?" Derek's hesitation stretched long enough that Jim could map the man's uncertainty. Behind them, Cooper remained motionless, except for the steady rise and fall of his ribs. 3 years of partnership had taught them both when to wait. "Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do here," Derek said, his tone sharpening slightly. "But I've got corporate breathing down, my neck about maintaining standards. We're not Walmart. We cater to a specific clientele, and frankly, having animals in the store doesn't project the image we're going for." Jim felt heat rise in his chest, not anger exactly, but something more dangerous, the careful control that had kept him alive in Helmand province, that had gotten him through 2 years of rehabilitation, that had held his marriage together right up until it didn't. "Are you refusing me service because of my disability?" "I'm not refusing you anything. I'm just saying the dog needs to wait outside." "The dog," Jim said quietly, "has a name, and he stays with me." From somewhere to his left, a female voice spoke up, quiet, accented. "Excuse me, Mr. Walsh. Sir, I think there might be some confusion about the law here. Elena, we've discussed this before. I handle customer relations. But sir, service dogs are legally—" "Elena, please return to your station." Jim turned toward the woman's voice. "Ma'am, I'd appreciate any information you might have." Derek stepped closer, and Jim could smell his cologne, something expensive and overpowering. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to remove the animal or leave the premises. I need to purchase a laptop for my work. I'm a cybersecurity consultant and I understand your needs, but our policy is clear." Jim's hand found Cooper's head, fingers working through the familiar fur. The dog's presence steadied him, reminded him of all the battles worth fighting. "Your policy violates federal law. Sir, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Around them, the store had grown quieter. Jim could sense the shift, conversation stopping, footsteps slowing, the peculiar electricity that gathered around conflict. His military training catalogued exits, obstacles, potential allies, old habits. "I'm not making anything difficult," Jim said. "I'm trying to buy a computer." Derek's sigh carried exasperation and something that might have been panic. "Security to Tech World Electronics. Security to Tech World, please." The announcement echoed through the store, and Jim felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, he'd left fear behind in an Afghan valley 3 years ago, but frustration, the grinding exhaustion of having to fight for basic dignity. In every transaction, every interaction, every day. "Mr. Walsh," Eleanor's voice again, more urgent now. "Please, the ADA clearly states—" "Eleanor, I need you to step back. This is a management decision." Jim could hear phones coming out around them, the subtle electronic chimes of cameras activating. In 2024, every public confrontation became potential viral content. He straightened his shoulders, drew on the bearing that had once commanded Marines in combat. "Cooper, stay," he said softly, and felt the dog's acknowledgement in the shift of weight against his leg. The security guards arrived with the sound of heavy boots and radio static. 2 of them, Jim judged by the footsteps. Mall security, not real cops, but authority enough to escalate things beyond repair. "What's the situation here?" The voice was older, tired. "This gentleman is refusing to comply with store policy regarding animals," Derek said quickly. "I've asked him multiple times to remove the dog." "Service dog," Jim corrected. "And I've explained multiple times that federal law protects my right to be here with him." One of the guards, the younger one by his voice, spoke up. "Sir, if this is a legitimate service animal, you should have documentation." "No." Jim's voice cut through the speculation like a blade. "Federal law doesn't require documentation. It doesn't require special vests or certifications. It requires only that this is a trained service animal performing work related to my disability." "Look, buddy," the older guard said, "we're just trying to resolve this peacefully. Why don't you step outside with us, and we can figure this out?" Jim felt the moment crystallizing around him. Every eye in the store focused on this confrontation, every phone recording his response. He could leave quietly, buy his laptop somewhere else, avoid the scene. It would be easier, but easier had never been the point. "I'll leave," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the store. "But I want everyone here to understand what just happened. I'm being refused service not because I'm disruptive, not because my dog is misbehaving, but because this store's manager doesn't understand federal disability law. Or more likely, doesn't care." He paused, letting that sink. "And I'll be filing a complaint with the Department of Justice. This is discrimination, plain and simple." Derek's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, you're welcome to file whatever complaints you want, but—" "Mr. Carter." Eleanor's voice, clear and determined. "Jim Carter, right? I heard you give your name earlier." "Yes." "My name is Elena Vasquez. I work here and I witnessed this entire conversation. If you need a witness for your complaint, I want you to have my contact information." The silence stretched taut. Jim heard Derek's sharp intake of breath, sensed the shift in dynamics as an employee publicly broke ranks with management. "Eleanor?" Derek started. "It's the right thing to do," she said firmly. Jim felt Cooper shift beside him, the dog's training keeping him perfectly positioned despite the chaos around them. "I'd appreciate that, Ms. Vasquez." He heard her approaching, the soft sound of paper tearing. "My cell phone number," she said, pressing something into his hand. "And Mr. Carter, I'm sorry this happened. You deserve better." Jim's throat tightened unexpectedly. In 3 years of fighting these battles, allies had been rare. "Thank you." The walk to the exit felt endless and instant simultaneously. Cooper guided him through the maze of displays and shocked customers, past the security guards who parted like an unwilling honor guard. At the entrance, Jim paused. "Derek Walsh," he said, his voice carrying back into the store. "Manager of Tech World Electronics, Park Meadows Mall. I want that on record." The automatic doors closed behind them with mechanical finality. In the corridor beyond, Jim could hear the resumed hum of conversation, the return to normal business. But nothing about this felt normal. His phone was already in his hand, muscle memory from 1,000 similar moments. But this time, the call wouldn't be to apologize for the inconvenience or to find an alternative. This time, he was calling a lawyer. Cooper's steady breathing reminded him that he wasn't alone in this fight. And for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, Jim Carter felt ready for war. Cooper's steady breathing reminded him that he wasn't alone in this fight. And for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, Jim Carter felt ready for war. The drive home passed in measured silence, broken only by the GPS's mechanical directions and Cooper's occasional shift in the passenger seat. Jim's hands maintained their grip on the steering wheel, adapted with tactile markers that Ryan had installed last year, while his mind catalogued next steps with military precision. File the DOJ complaint, contact civil rights attorneys, document everything. While the details remained sharp, the familiar turn into their driveway brought the scent of autumn leaves and the sound of a lawnmower 3 houses down. Normal suburban Saturday sounds that felt surreal after the confrontation at Tech World. Jim guided Cooper through their front door routine, muscle memory born from 18 months of practice. "Uncle Jim, you're back early." Ryan's voice carried from the kitchen, along with the electronic beeping of a video game on pause. "Thought you were laptop shopping." Change of plans. Jim unclipped Cooper's harness, watching the dog's immediate shift from working mode to home mode. The transformation never failed to amaze him. Cooper's entire body language relaxed, tail wagging slightly as he padded toward his water bowl. "What happened?" The concern in his nephew's voice was sharp, immediate. At 16, Ryan had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the undertones in Jim's voice, the subtle signs that indicated when the world had thrown another obstacle in their path. Jim settled into his chair at the kitchen table, the one positioned to catch afternoon sunlight through the window he couldn't see but could feel warming his left shoulder. Store manager at Tech World decided Cooper wasn't welcome. The silence stretched long enough that Jim could hear Ryan's breathing change, the way it did when the kid was processing something that made him angry. "They threw you out? For having a service dog?" "They tried to. I left before it escalated further." Jim pulled out his phone, finger tracing the familiar pattern of contacts, but not before making it clear this wasn't over. Did anyone record it? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Ryan lived in a digital world where injustice unwitnessed was injustice unanswered. Multiple people had their phones out. "Give me 5 minutes." The rapid footsteps up the stairs told Jim that his nephew was already shifting into his preferred mode of combat, digital warfare waged through hashtags and viral videos. Ryan had inherited his father's sense of justice, but expressed it through means that would have baffled his grandfather's generation. Jim's phone call to the DOJ's Civil Rights Division went to voicemail, as expected on a Saturday afternoon. His message was precise, factual, devoid of emotion. "This is James Carter, calling to file a formal complaint under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was refused service at Tech World Electronics in Park Meadows Mall due to my service dog. I can be reached at..." The second call went to Maria Santos, the disability rights advocate whose card had lived in his wallet for 6 months, given to him by Dr. Lisa Park during one of Cooper's routine training sessions. Maria answered on the third ring. "Jim Carter, Lisa Park's client with the beautiful German Shepherd?" "That's right. I need advice about filing an ADA complaint." Her voice sharpened immediately. "What happened?" Jim recounted the incident, with the same factual precision he'd used for the DOJ voicemail. Maria listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds that suggested she was taking notes. "Tech World Electronics," she said when he finished. "That's the third complaint I've heard about them in 6 months. Have you contacted an attorney?" "Next on my list. I'll send you some names, but Jim, this could be bigger than just your incident. If there's a pattern of discrimination..." Jim felt something shift in his chest, not quite hope, but something harder. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking maybe it's time someone held them accountable." 20 minutes later, Ryan thundered back down the stairs with the barely contained energy of someone who'd found exactly what they were looking for. "Uncle Jim, you need to hear this." The laptop speakers crackled to life, and Jim heard his own voice, tinny but clear. "I'll be filing a complaint with the Department of Justice. This is discrimination, plain and simple." "TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, it's everywhere," Ryan said, his words tumbling over each other in excitement. "The hashtag service dog rights is already trending locally. Look at these comments." He began reading aloud, his voice taking on different inflections for each post. "This is exactly what my sister faces with her mobility dog. I boycott Tech World until they fix this. That manager should be fired immediately." Jim listened, feeling the strange sensation of his private humiliation becoming public rallying cry. "How many views?" "The main video has 40,000. Already, and it's only been up for 2 hours. Uncle Jim, people are pissed." The phone rang before Jim could process the implications. Dr. Lisa Park's name appeared on his caller ID, read aloud by the phone's accessibility feature. "Lisa, I just saw the video. Are you okay?" Her voice carried the particular blend of professional concern and personal care that had characterized their relationship since Cooper's training began. Lisa had been there for the worst days of adjustment, when Jim's pride had warred with his need for help, when learning to trust Cooper had meant learning to trust himself again. "I'm fine. Angry, but fine." "Good. Angry is appropriate. I'm driving over." "Lisa, you don't need to..." "I'm already in my car. Have you eaten today?" The question caught him off guard, mainly because he realized he hadn't. The confrontation at Tech World had killed his appetite, but his body was beginning to register the oversight. "I'll make sandwiches," Ryan called out, already moving toward the refrigerator. "Tell that nephew of yours I said he's a good kid," Lisa said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. And Jim, we're going to fight this properly. I know people." The line went dead, leaving Jim with the peculiar sensation of being cared for by people who chose to be in his life rather than people obligated by blood or duty. It was a feeling he was still learning to accept. His phone buzzed with a text. Message from an unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is Elena Vasquez from Tech World. I saw what happened on social media. If you need me to testify about what I witnessed, I'm willing. What happened to you was wrong. Jim stared at the screen, or rather at the general location where he knew the screen was. In his experience, witnesses usually disappeared when the cameras stopped rolling, preferring to avoid the complications that came with speaking truth to power. Ryan, read this text message for me. His nephew's sharp intake of breath confirmed what Jim suspected. She's putting her job on the line for you. Sounds like it. That's actually pretty badass. Jim's smile felt like the first genuine one all day. Yeah, it is. The afternoon sun had shifted, no longer warming his shoulder, when Jim heard Derek Walsh's voice on the local news. Ryan had the television on for background noise while he monitored social media, but the mention of Tech World brought them both to attention. The safety and comfort of all our customers is our primary concern, Derek was saying, his voice carrying the stilted quality of someone reading from a corporate script. We're reviewing our policies to ensure full compliance with all applicable laws. Compliance with laws shouldn't require review, Jim said quietly. It should be automatic. His phone rang again. This time the caller ID announced a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Mr. Carter, this is Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your response to Tech World's statement about today's incident. Jim looked toward where he knew Ryan was sitting, probably wide-eyed at this latest development. Cooper had settled beside Jim's chair, chin resting on his paws, in the particular way that meant he was monitoring the emotional temperature of the room. "What do you think, boy?" Jim asked, scratching behind Cooper's ears. "Ready to tell our side of the story?" Cooper's tail thumped once against the floor. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement that whatever his human decided, they'd face it together. By evening, Jim Carter's name had become a hashtag, his confrontation with Derek Walsh a symbol of something larger than either man had intended. The machinery of justice moved slowly, but the machinery of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. The war had begun. By Monday morning, Agent Sarah Rodriguez had already read through 3 separate forwarded complaints about Tech World Electronics, cross-referenced them with her existing case files, and recognized the pattern that made her coffee taste bitter. 23 years in law enforcement, first as a prosecutor in Phoenix, then 5 years with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, had taught her to spot systematic discrimination the way a meteorologist spotted storm fronts. The James Carter complaint sat at the top of her desk, flagged urgent by her supervisor after the weekend's social media explosion. But it was the other 2 complaints, filed months apart and buried in bureaucratic processing, that made her reach for her travel authorization forms. Denver again? Special Agent Marcus Webb looked up from his own stack of case files. Didn't you just get back from that voting rights case in Colorado Springs? Different issue, Tech World Electronics. Sarah pulled up the company's corporate structure on her laptop. Regional chain, about 40 stores across 6 states, and I'm seeing a pattern. Webb leaned back in his chair, the movement causing it to squeak in the particular way that had annoyed their entire bureau section for 3 years. Pattern how? Service dog denials, wheelchair accessibility issues, customers with visible disabilities being followed by security. Sarah clicked through the digital files, each complaint a small injustice that gained weight in accumulation. The Carter incident just happened to get filmed. Media attention, trending hashtag, local news coverage, and about 50,000 views on TikTok. Sarah closed her laptop with more force than necessary. Time to find out if this is managerial ignorance or corporate policy. The flight to Denver gave her time to review the Carter file in detail. Marine veteran, lost his sight in Afghanistan, clean record, currently working as a cybersecurity consultant. His complaint was methodical, factual, and damning in its understatement, but it was the witness statement from Elena Vasquez that made Sarah's prosecutorial instincts hum with anticipation. I have worked at TechWorld for 8 months. In that time, I have witnessed at least 6 incidents where customers with disabilities were treated differently than other customers. Mr. Walsh has previously instructed staff to keep an eye on customers using wheelchairs or mobility aids, citing liability concerns. When I mentioned ADA requirements during training, I was told that corporate would handle legal issues. Sarah's rental car cut through Denver traffic toward the modest house where James Carter lived with his nephew. The address sat in a middle-class neighborhood that spoke of steady work and careful budgets, the kind of place where people minded their own business until something forced them to choose sides. Ryan Carter answered the door, a 16-year-old, with serious eyes and the particular alertness that came from serving as his uncle's interface with a world designed for the sighted. "Agent Rodriguez, Uncle Jim's expecting you." The living room was arranged with the mathematical precision that spoke of necessity rather than preference. Jim Carter rose from a chair positioned to catch morning light, his hand finding Cooper's, harness in a movement so natural it seemed unconscious. "Agent Rodriguez, thank you for coming personally." His handshake was firm, direct, carrying the particular confidence that came from learning to navigate the world through touch and sound. Cooper remained perfectly still beside him, alert, but not aggressive, the picture of professional calm that Sarah had learned to recognize in truly exceptional service animals. "I've reviewed your complaint, Mr. Carter. I'd like to hear the details in your own words." Ubid, for the next 40 minutes, Sarah listened to Jim's account of Saturday's incident, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly letting him tell the story at his own pace. Ryan provided technical support, operating Sarah's digital recorder and occasionally filling in details about the social media response. "The employee who gave you her contact information, Elena Vasquez. Have you spoken with her since Saturday?" "Briefly. She texted to offer her support and ask if I needed her testimony." Jim's fingers worked through Cooper's fur as he spoke, the gesture unconscious but revealing. "I got the impression she was taking a significant risk." Sarah made a note. Witness intimidation was always a concern in employment-related discrimination cases, especially when the witness was economically vulnerable. "I'll need to interview her. And Mr. Carter, I should tell you, your case isn't isolated. We're looking at a potential pattern of discrimination at TechWorld locations." Ryan's sharp intake of breath was audible. "You mean this is happening? To other people?" "That's what I'm here to determine." Sarah closed her notebook, but didn't put it away. "I'll need to interview store employees, review corporate training materials, examine internal communications. If there's systematic discrimination happening, we'll find it." Jim's expression remained steady, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "Depends on what we find. If this is just poor training and managerial ignorance, it could be resolved relatively quickly if there's evidence of deliberate corporate policy." She let the implication hang in the air. "Agent Rodriguez," Ryan said suddenly, "how many other complaints are there?" Sarah studied the teenager's face, recognizing the particular intensity that came from someone discovering their personal injustice was part of a larger pattern. "I can't discuss ongoing investigations, but I can tell you that your uncle's courage in filing this complaint may help other people who've faced similar treatment." The TechWorld store at Park Meadows Mall looked different through investigative eyes. Sarah arrived during the Monday afternoon lull when the weekend rush had faded, but evening shoppers hadn't yet appeared. The store's layout was standard, Retail, wide aisles, clearly marked sections, generally accessible design. Nothing that would immediately suggest discrimination. Derek Walsh was waiting for her near the customer service counter, his posture carrying the particular tension of someone who'd spent the weekend fielding calls from corporate lawyers. 30s, carefully styled hair, wearing a tie that probably cost more than some of his employees made in a day. Agent Rodriguez, Derek Walsh, store manager. I understand you want to discuss Saturday's incident. I want to discuss your store's compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Sarah pulled out her badge, letting him get a good look at the federal authority it represented. Is there somewhere private we can talk? The manager's office was small, cluttered with corporate memos and performance charts. Sarah noted the employee handbook sitting prominently on the desk, probably placed there specifically for her visit. Derek's hands shook slightly as he offered her coffee, which she declined. Mr. Walsh, I'd like you to walk me through your understanding of federal disability law as it applies to service animals. His answer was textbook perfect, too perfect, carrying the careful precision of someone who'd been coached extensively over the weekend. Sarah had heard similar rehearsed responses countless times, usually from people who'd suddenly discovered legal requirements after violating them. That's an excellent summary of the law, she said when he finished. Now I'd like you to tell me what happened on Saturday afternoon. Derek's version of events painted him as a reasonable manager caught between conflicting policies and difficult customers. Jim Carter became argumentative, Cooper became disruptive, and the security call was a last resort for everyone's safety. Mr. Walsh, you mentioned conflicting policies. What policy conflicts with ADA compliance? The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Derek's careful composure cracked slightly, revealing the man who'd made Saturday's decisions based on fear rather than knowledge. Well, we have corporate guidelines about maintaining the shopping environment, ensuring customer comfort. Customer comfort supersedes federal law. No, of course not. I was trying to balance multiple concerns. Sarah made careful notes, watching Derek's body language deteriorate with each question. This wasn't malice. This was ignorance reinforced by corporate culture that prioritized image over compliance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'll need to speak with other employees who were present Saturday, starting with Elena Vasquez. Derek's face went carefully blank. Elena? I'm not sure she saw much of what happened. She was busy with other customers. Mr. Walsh, are you attempting to discourage me from interviewing a potential witness? No, ma'am. Absolutely not. I just want to make sure you get accurate information. Elena Vasquez arrived for her shift 20 minutes later, her posture carrying the particular wariness of someone who'd spent the weekend wondering if she'd still have a job. Small, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Sarah recognized the type. Immigrants who'd learned to navigate complex systems through careful observation and quiet determination. Ms. Vasquez, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. I'd like to ask you some questions about Saturday's incident. Elena's testimony was devastating in its precision. She recounted not just Saturday's events, but months of similar incidents. Customers with disabilities being followed, questioned, discouraged. She provided dates, names, specific examples of discriminatory treatment that painted a picture of systematic bias. Has management ever provided training on disability rights? We got a handbook during orientation, but Mr. Walsh told us that if we had questions about special situations, we should ask him directly. What did he mean by special situations? Elena's pause was telling. Customers who might be difficult to serve. people with wheelchairs, service animals, anyone who might make other customers uncomfortable. Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with uncovering institutional discrimination. This wasn't just about James Carter and Cooper. This was about a corporate culture that viewed disabled customers as problems to be managed, rather than people to be served. Her phone buzzed with a text from her partner in Denver, found similar complaints in Boulder and Fort Collins. Same company, same patterns. This is big. Sarah looked around the Tech World store, noting the employees who were carefully not listening to her conversation with Elena, the corporate surveillance cameras that would have recorded Saturday's incident, the training materials that would reveal whether this discrimination was accidental or intentional. James Carter's war was about to become a federal case. James Carter's war was about to become a federal case. By Tuesday morning, the crisis management team at Tech World's regional headquarters had already assembled in their glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Denver. James Mitchell, regional director, studied the social media analytics on his tablet while corporate attorneys arranged stacks of legal documents with military precision. 48 hours, Mitchell said, his voice carrying the particular calm that came from years of managing corporate disasters. 48 hours from a routine customer service issue to federal investigation. Explain to me how this happened. Indeed, the three attorneys exchanged glances that spoke of billable hours and liability assessments. Senior counsel Margaret Chen cleared her throat. The employee's testimony to the FBI agent suggests systematic non-compliance rather than isolated incident. If Agent Rodriguez establishes a pattern across multiple locations, then we're looking at class action potential, punitive damages, and consent decree oversight. Mitchell's interruption carried the weight of someone who'd navigated similar crises for Fortune 500 companies. What's our exposure? Depends on discovery. If internal communications show deliberate policy to discourage disabled customers, we're in significant trouble. If this appears to be managerial incompetence and poor training. Chen shuffled through her files. Still substantial, but manageable. Mitchell's phone buzzed with another news alert. The story had jumped from local Denver coverage to national disability rights blogs, with advocacy organizations beginning to coordinate response strategies. His stock options were worth 30% less than they'd been on Friday. Where's Walsh now? Home on administrative leave pending investigation. Chen consulted her notes. He's retained private counsel, which suggests he understands the gravity of his situation. Good. Make sure he understands it fully. Derek Walsh sat in his attorney's office 40 minutes later, discovering exactly how expendable corporate loyalty became when federal investigators arrived. His lawyer, Patricia Vance, had made her reputation defending executives in white-collar cases, but her expression suggested this wouldn't be among her victories. Derek, I need you to understand something. Tech World's interests and your interests are no longer aligned. They're going to position this as rogue employee behavior. One manager who exceeded his authority and violated company policy. Derek's hands clenched in his lap. But I was following guidelines. Corporate always emphasized customer experience, maintaining standards, avoiding liability issues. Do you have those guidelines in writing? The question hung in the air, like a death sentence. Derek thought of the orientation sessions, the performance reviews, the countless conversations about managing difficult customers and protecting the brand. None of it had been written down. They were verbal instructions, part of ongoing training. Patricia's expression didn't change, but Derek caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Derek, without documentation, it's your word against a multi-billion-dollar corporation with unlimited legal resources. And right now, their survival strategy requires making you the villain. Meanwhile, across town, Agent Rodriguez was discovering just how deep Tech World's problems ran. Her interview with store employee Marcus Johnson, a college student who worked weekends, revealed another layer of institutional discrimination. "We had this thing called the difficult customer protocol," Marcus explained, his young face serious with the weight of revelation. "Basically, if someone came in who might cause problems, people with disabilities, elderly customers who asked lots of questions, anyone who seemed like they might complain, we were supposed to notify management immediately." Sarah made careful notes. Was this protocol written down anywhere? "No, just something Mr. Walsh explained during training. He said corporate wanted us to be proactive about preventing situations." "What kind of situations?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Complaints, bad reviews, customers who might make other customers uncomfortable. He said our customer base expected a certain experience." The pattern was becoming clear. Tech World had created an unwritten policy of selective service, filtering customers based on perceived potential for complications. It was discrimination by corporate design, implemented through verbal instructions that left no paper trail. Sarah's phone rang as she left the interview. Her partner's voice carried excitement. "Rodriguez, you need to see what we found in the Boulder store. Internal emails between their manager and district supervision. They're not as careful about documentation as they think." That afternoon, Jim Carter received a call from Tech World's customer service department. The voice belonged to someone trained in corporate crisis management, professional, apologetic, and carefully scripted. "Mr. Carter, I'm calling on behalf of Tech World Electronics to express our sincere regret about Saturday's incident. We'd like to invite you to return to the store at your convenience for a personal shopping experience with our district manager, who will ensure you receive the service you deserve." Jim listened to the offer with the particular attention he'd learned to apply to verbal contracts. "Are you admitting that Saturday's incident was discriminatory?" A pause. "We're committed to serving all customers in accordance with applicable laws and regulations." "That's not what I asked." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Carter, we're prepared to offer compensation for your inconvenience, along with a formal apology and assurance that this won't happen again." "What kind of compensation?" "A store credit for your laptop purchase plus additional consideration for your time and trouble." Jim felt Cooper shift beside his chair, the dog's draining alerting him to his human's elevated stress levels. "I'm not interested in store credit. I'm interested in ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else. Of course, that's exactly why we're implementing comprehensive retraining for all customer-facing staff. After the federal investigation concludes, you mean?" The silence stretched long enough that Jim wondered if the call had been disconnected. When the voice returned, it carried a different quality, less script, more human uncertainty. "Mr. Carter, litigation is expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. We're hoping to resolve this matter in a way that addresses your concerns while allowing both parties to move forward." Jim's training in reading vocal cues told him everything he needed to know. They were scared, not just of the legal costs, but of what Agent Rodriguez might uncover in her investigation. "I appreciate the call," he said finally. "But this isn't about compensation anymore. It's about accountability." That evening, Derek Walsh sat in his kitchen, staring at the termination letter that had arrived by certified mail, effective immediately due to violation of company policies regarding customer service and potential liability exposure. His 8 years with Tech World had been reduced to a corporate legal strategy. His brother David called while Derek was still processing the implications of unemployment at 32. "Derek, I saw the news story about your store, the one with the veteran and his service dog." David's voice carried the particular directness that came with autism. No social filtering, just honest observation. That was really messed up what happened to him. Derek felt something crack inside his chest. David had been diagnosed with autism at age 7, had struggled through school with minimal support, had fought for every accommodation he'd ever received, and Derek had just discriminated against someone seeking the same basic respect his brother deserved. "Dave, I made a mistake." "Yeah, you did. A really big one." David's honesty was brutal, but not cruel. "That guy just wanted to buy a computer, right? Like when I go shopping and people treat me weird because I stim or ask too many questions." The parallel hit Derek like a physical blow. How many times had he comforted David after difficult shopping experiences, had complained about businesses that didn't understand his brother's needs? How many times had he been the advocate demanding better treatment for people with disabilities? "I got fired today." "Good," David said simply. "Maybe now you can figure out how to be better." The call ended, leaving Derek alone with the wreckage of his career and the growing realization that his actions had consequences far beyond his own life. Somewhere in Denver, a blind veteran was fighting for rights that Derek's own brother needed and deserved. The corporate machinery of damage control continued grinding through the night, preparing statements and strategies, calculating settlements and liability limits. But in the quiet spaces between legal maneuvers and public relations campaigns, individual lives were being forced to confront fundamental questions about justice, dignity, and the courage required to do what was right. Derek Walsh picked up his phone and began typing a message he should have sent days ago. "Mr. Carter, my name is Derek Walsh. I owe you an apology." The war had claimed its first casualty, but the battle for accountability was just beginning. The war had claimed its first casualty, but the battle for accountability was just beginning. Derek Walsh stared at his phone screen for 20 minutes before hitting send on the message to Jim Carter. The words felt inadequate. How do you apologize for systematic dehumanization in a text message? But they were a start. "Mr. Carter, my name is Derek Walsh. I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what happened at the store. If you're willing to listen, I'd like the chance to explain how wrong I was and how I plan to do better." Across town, Jim was discovering that federal civil rights cases came with unexpected complications. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since Agent Rodriguez's investigation became public knowledge. Reporters, advocacy groups, other veterans with similar stories, everyone wanted a piece of his narrative. "Uncle Jim, you've got 3 more interview requests," Ryan called from the kitchen, where he'd established a command center for managing media inquiries. CBS This Morning, NPR, and something called the Disability Rights Legal Center. Jim rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of unwanted celebrity. "What does Dr. Park think about all this?" Lisa's voice came from the living room, where she'd been reviewing legal documents with the calm precision that made her such an effective advocate. "I think you need to set boundaries. This case is important, but you're not required to be the spokesperson for every disability rights issue in America." She'd arrived that morning with coffee and the particular blend of professional expertise and personal concern that had characterized their relationship since Cooper's training began. Somewhere in the past few days, the line between service, dog trainer, and trusted friend had blurred into something more complex. "The DRLC request is interesting, though," she continued, settling beside Jim on the couch with papers rustling. "They're not asking for an interview. They want to discuss coordination with other tech world discrimination cases." Jim felt Cooper's weight against his leg, the dog's presence grounding him in the moment. "Other cases. Agent Rodriguez's investigation has encouraged people to come forward. A woman in Boulder whose wheelchair was too large for the store aisles. A deaf customer in Fort Collins who was refused service because he couldn't understand spoken instructions. Lisa's voice carried the controlled anger of someone who'd spent years fighting these battles. Your courage in filing that complaint opened the floodgates. The doorbell interrupted before Jim could process the implications. Ryan's footsteps, then voices in the hallway, surprised, tentative, uncertain. "Uncle Jim, there's someone here to see you. Says his name is Derek Walsh." The silence in the living room felt electric. Lisa's sharp intake of breath, Cooper's ears pricking forward, Jim's own heartbeat suddenly audible in his ears. The man who'd started this entire cascade of events was standing on his front porch. "Do you want to see him?" Ryan's voice carried protective edge that made Jim's chest tighten with affection for his nephew. Jim looked toward Lisa, reading her tension in the quality of her breathing. "What do you think?" "I think," she said carefully, "that people don't usually show up at the homes of people they've wronged unless they have something important to say. But I also think you don't owe him anything." "Send him in," Jim decided. "But Ryan, you and—" "Lisa, stay close." Derek Walsh looked smaller than his voice had suggested. Jim couldn't see the visual details, but he could read the man's emotional state in his footsteps, hesitant, careful, carrying the weight of someone who'd lost everything familiar. When Derek spoke, his voice cracked with exhaustion. "Mr. Carter, thank you for seeing me. I know you have no reason to trust anything I say." "You're right," Jim said simply. "I don't. But I'm willing to listen." What followed was the most honest conversation Derek had ever had about his own prejudices and fears. He talked about corporate pressure and performance metrics, about the unwritten rules that prioritized comfort over compliance. But more than that, he talked about his brother David, about the contradiction between loving someone with a disability while discriminating against others. "David called me after he saw the news," Derek said, his voice breaking slightly. "He told me I was exactly like the people who've made his life harder, and he was right." Lisa spoke for the first time since Derek's arrival. "Mr. Walsh, recognition of wrongdoing is important, but what matters now is what you do with that recognition. I've been in contact with Agent Rodriguez. I'm willing to testify about the corporate culture that influenced my decisions, about the verbal instructions to discourage certain customers, the pressure to maintain standards that really meant discrimination." Derek paused, gathering courage. "I know it won't undo the harm I caused, but I want to help prevent it from happening to others." Jim felt something shift in the room's emotional atmosphere, not forgiveness. That would take time and proof of sustained change, but the possibility of redemption through accountability. "Derek," he said quietly, "what happens to you if you testify against your former employer? I'll probably never work in retail management again. Tech World's legal team will destroy my reputation to protect their case." Derek's laugh was bitter, but not self-pitying. "But I've been thinking about what my brother said. Maybe it's time I figured out how to be better." The conversation continued for another hour, covering Derek's willingness to cooperate with the investigation, his understanding of the legal consequences, his plans for rebuilding his life around different values. When he left, Jim felt the peculiar exhaustion that came from emotional rather than physical exertion. "What do you think?" he asked Lisa after Derek's footsteps faded down the driveway. "I think," she said, settling back beside him on the couch, "that watching someone genuinely confront their own capacity for harm is one of the most difficult and important things humans can do." Ryan's voice carried from the kitchen, where he'd been monitoring social media throughout Derek's visit. "Uncle Jim, you need to see this. The hashtag just hit 1 million mentions." But Jim was focused on something more immediate and personal. Lisa's hand had found his during Derek's confession, their fingers interlacing with the natural ease of two people discovering they trusted each other with more than professional responsibilities. "Lisa," he said quietly, "when this is all over, when the investigation concludes and the media attention dies down, would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that's not related to Cooper's training or disability rights or any of this?" Her laugh was warm, genuine, carrying relief and something that might have been joy. "Jim Carter, I thought you'd never ask. Yes, I would like that very much." Cooper's tail thumped against the floor, his service dog training apparently including approval of his human's romantic decisions. Outside, Denver continued its evening routine. But inside this small house, 3 lives had just realigned around the possibility that justice and personal happiness weren't mutually exclusive. Elena Vasquez was discovering that whistleblowing came with unexpected costs and surprising rewards. Her manager had assigned her to inventory duty, the retail equivalent of exile, but her co-workers had begun approaching her with their own stories of questionable management decisions. "Eleanor," whispered Maria, a part-time employee who worked evenings, "remember that customer last month, the one with the prosthetic leg who Mr. Walsh said was making other customers uncomfortable?" The stories accumulated like drops of water, eventually becoming a flood. Each incident Elena documented strengthened Agent Rodriguez's case, while deepening her own understanding of how discrimination operated, not through dramatic confrontations, but through daily microaggressions that wore people down until they simply shopped elsewhere. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jim Carter. "Ms. Vasquez, Derek Walsh came to see me today. He's planning to testify on behalf of the investigation. Thought you should know that your courage is inspiring others to do the right thing." Elena smiled. For the first time all week, her nursing school applications were due next month, and the scholarship fund established in Jim's name would make her dreams financially possible. Sometimes doing the right thing came with unexpected rewards. Late that night, Derek Walsh sat in his apartment, drafting a statement for Agent Rodriguez that would detail every discriminatory instruction he'd ever received from corporate management. His brother David had texted earlier, "Proud of you for finally choosing the right side." For the first time since Saturday, Derek felt like he might eventually be able to live with himself again. The war for accountability was becoming a story about redemption, responsibility, and the possibility that even those who caused harm could become part of the solution. The war for accountability was becoming a story about redemption, responsibility, and the possibility that even those who caused harm could become part of the solution. Judge Patricia Hawthorne's federal courtroom carried the weight of institutional authority, mahogany panels, brass fixtures, and the particular silence that came with constitutional gravity. At 62, she'd presided over enough civil rights cases to recognize when personal injustice intersected with systematic discrimination, creating the perfect storm for legal precedent. Jim Carter sat at the plaintiff's table, Cooper positioned beside him in the narrow space between chairs and counsel table. The German shepherd's calm presence drew subtle attention from court personnel. Several had never seen a service dog in actual courtroom operation. Lisa Park sat in the gallery's front row, her professional expertise available if needed for technical questions about service dog training. Agent Rodriguez occupied the witness coordinator section, her investigation files organized with prosecutorial precision. 3 weeks of depositions, document review, and employee interviews had revealed TechWorld's discrimination as both broader and more deliberate than anyone had initially suspected. Derek Walsh sat alone in the back corner, no longer representing corporate interests, but still central to the case's outcome. His decision to testify truthfully had cost him his legal representation. TechWorld's attorneys had abandoned him the moment he chose accountability over corporate protection. Patricia Vance, his personal attorney, had arranged for him to represent himself with her guidance, understanding that his testimony could either destroy or redeem him. "The court will come to order," Judge Hawthorne announced, her voice carrying the authority that came from 15 years on the federal bench. "We're here for preliminary hearing in Carter versus TechWorld Electronics, Incorporated, regarding alleged violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act." Opening arguments established the competing narratives that would define the case. TechWorld's lead counsel, Martin Brennan, painted Derek's actions as the unauthorized decisions of a poorly trained manager who exceeded his authority and violated clear corporate policy. "Your Honor, TechWorld Electronics has served customers with disabilities for over 20 years without incident. Mr. Walsh's regrettable decisions on March 15th do not reflect corporate policy or systematic discrimination. They reflect individual failure to follow established procedures." Jim's attorney, civil rights specialist Catherine Morgan, countered with the systematic evidence Agent Rodriguez had uncovered. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Walsh's actions weren't aberrant behavior, but the predictable result of corporate policies designed to discourage disabled customers while maintaining plausible deniability." Judge Hawthorne listened with the particular attention she reserved for cases involving constitutional rights. Her husband had been a Vietnam veteran who'd struggled with PTSD and discrimination after returning home. She understood both the law and the human cost of institutional prejudice. "Mr. Carter, please approach the witness stand." Jim's testimony began with the basic facts: his military service, his injury, Cooper's training and role in his daily life. His voice remained steady as he recounted the incident at TechWorld, but those who knew him could detect the controlled emotion beneath his calm delivery. "Mr. Carter," Catherine Morgan continued, "when Mr. Walsh refused to allow Cooper in the store, how did that make you feel?" "Objection," Brennan interrupted. "Relevance to legal violation rather than emotional impact." "Your Honor," Morgan responded, "the plaintiff's emotional state is relevant to damages and to understanding the broader impact of discriminatory practices." Judge Hawthorne considered. "I'll allow limited testimony about emotional impact, but let's focus on the concrete effects of the alleged discrimination." Jim's answer was measured, precise. "It made me feel like my service to this country, my sacrifice, meant nothing to someone who saw only my disability and decided I didn't belong in his store. But more than that, it made me realize that if this could happen to me, someone with legal knowledge and advocacy skills, it was probably happening to other disabled people who might not know how to fight back." The courtroom stirred at his words. Several veterans' organization representatives in the gallery nodded recognition of shared experience. Eleanor Vasquez, sitting with other witnesses, wiped away tears she hadn't expected. Dr. Lisa Parks, expert. Testimony educated the court about service dog training, legal protections, and the specific work Cooper performed for Jim. Her explanation of the 18-month training process, the thousands of dollars in specialized preparation, and the precise tasks Cooper was trained to perform helped establish the service animal's legitimacy beyond any possible doubt. "Dr. Park," Brennan cross-examined, "isn't it true that some people attempt to pass off ordinary pets as service animals to gain access to public spaces?" "Yes, that unfortunately happens. But Cooper's training is documented, his behavior is professionally maintained, and his work for Mr. Carter is clearly defined and necessary." Lisa's voice carried professional authority that brooked no challenge. "This is precisely the kind of legitimate service animal the ADA was designed to protect." Elena's testimony proved devastating to TechWorld's defense. Her detailed recounting of multiple discriminatory incidents, combined with her documentation of verbal instructions from management, painted a picture of systematic bias that went far beyond Derek's individual decisions. "Ms. Vasquez," Morgan asked, "what did Mr. Walsh tell you about serving customers with disabilities?" "He said we needed to be proactive about potential problems, that customers with disabilities often caused situations that made other customers uncomfortable, and that our job was to maintain the shopping experience for our target demographic." Brennan's cross-examination attempted to discredit Elena's memory and motivations, but her quiet determination and specific documentation proved unshakable. When he suggested she was testifying for revenge against an employer who disciplined her, Elena's response was simple and powerful. "Sir, I'm testifying because what happened to Mr. Carter was wrong, and because it's been happening to other people for months. My job isn't worth more than telling the truth." Judge Hawthorne watched Elena leave the witness stand with evident respect. In 25 years of legal practice, she'd learned to recognize moral courage when she saw it. The afternoon belonged to Agent Rodriguez, whose methodical presentation of evidence revealed the scope of TechWorld's discriminatory practices. Internal emails discussing problem customers, training materials that emphasized maintaining standards, and a pattern of similar incidents across multiple locations built the federal case with prosecutorial precision. "Agent Rodriguez," Morgan continued, "based on your investigation, was the incident involving Mr. Carter an isolated event?" "Absolutely not. We documented at least 12 similar incidents across 6 TechWorld locations in the past 18 months. The pattern suggests systematic discrimination rather than individual management failure." As court recessed for the day, Derek Walsh approached Jim in the hallway outside the courtroom. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent weeks contemplating the full scope of his actions. "Mr. Carter, I testify tomorrow. I want you to know that I'm going to tell the complete truth about what corporate taught me, what I was instructed to do, and how I failed you and others." Derek paused, gathering courage. "I can't undo the harm I caused, but I can make sure the court understands exactly how this discrimination was created and maintained." Jim extended his hand, feeling Derek's nervous energy in his grip. "That's all any of us can do, tell the truth and accept the consequences." Cooper's tail thumped once against the courthouse floor, his approval of human reconciliation noted and filed away in whatever mental space service dogs reserved for important emotional data. Tomorrow would bring Derek's testimony and TechWorld's desperate attempt to contain the legal damage. But today had established the foundation for justice, truth spoken under oath, courage rewarded with credibility, and the growing understanding that this case was about more than one discrimination incident. This was about the kind of society America chose to be. This was about the kind of society America chose to be. Derek Walsh's footsteps echoed through the courthouse corridor as he approached the witness stand, each step carrying the weight of professional destruction and personal redemption. Judge Hawthorne watched him settle into the chair with the particular attention she reserved for witnesses whose testimony might fundamentally alter a case's trajectory. "Mr. Walsh, please state your former position with TechWorld Electronics." "I was store manager at the Park Meadows Mall location for 14 months, after working my way up from sales associate over 8 years with the company." Catherine Morgan, Jim's attorney, had spent 2 days preparing Derek for this moment. His testimony would either validate the systematic discrimination case or provide TechWorld with the scapegoat narrative they desperately needed. "Mr. Walsh, when you refused service to Mr. Carter on March 15th, were you following company policy?" The question hung in the courtroom air like a judicial sword. Derek's answer would determine whether this remained an individual discrimination case or expanded into systematic corporate liability. I was following verbal instructions I'd received during management training and ongoing supervision. Instructions that weren't written down, but were made very clear during my tenure with the company. TechWorld's legal team shifted uncomfortably at their table. Martin Brennan's carefully constructed defense strategy had just encountered its first major obstacle. Their former employee was refusing to accept sole responsibility. What specific instructions did you receive regarding customers with disabilities? Derek's voice grew stronger as he continued, the relief of honesty replacing weeks of corporate scripted deception. During management training, Regional Director James Mitchell told me that TechWorld served a premium customer base with specific expectations about their shopping experience. He said we needed to be proactive about managing situations that might make other customers uncomfortable. Did he specifically mention customers with disabilities? He used terms like difficult customers, special needs situations, and liability risks. When I asked for clarification, he said I'd understand when I encountered these situations in practice. He told me to call district supervision for guidance on challenging cases. Judge Hawthorne leaned forward slightly. Mr. Walsh, are you testifying that corporate management provided verbal instructions to discriminate against disabled customers? Derek met her gaze directly. Your Honor, they provided instructions that led directly to discriminatory actions, while maintaining plausible deniability. They never said, discriminate against disabled people, but they made it clear that accommodating disabilities was seen as problematic for business operations. The courtroom stirred at his admission. Elena Vasquez nodded recognition from the gallery. Derek was confirming what she'd witnessed, but couldn't prove. Agent Rodriguez made careful notes, already considering how this testimony would strengthen similar cases in other jurisdictions. Morgan continued her examination methodically, building the systematic discrimination case through Derek's first-hand experience. He testified about specific training sessions, performance reviews that emphasized customer experience management, and conversations with district supervisors about avoiding problem situations. Mr. Walsh, when you encountered customers with service animals prior to March 15th, what instructions did you follow? I was told to assess each situation individually for potential disruption to other customers. If a service animal seemed disruptive or if other customers appeared uncomfortable, I was instructed to find ways to redirect those customers to more appropriate shopping venues. More appropriate venues. Stores that were better equipped to handle special needs customers. The implication was clear. We wanted to serve customers who wouldn't complicate our operations. Martin Brennan's cross-examination attempted to discredit Derek's testimony by portraying him as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge against his termination. But Derek's calm responses and detailed documentation proved difficult to challenge. Mr. Walsh, isn't it true that you're testifying against TechWorld because they terminated your employment? Mr. Brennan, TechWorld terminated me to create a scapegoat for systematic policies they helped create. I'm testifying because Mr. Carter deserves the truth about why he was discriminated against, and because other disabled customers deserve protection from similar treatment. You claim these were systematic policies, yet you can't produce written documentation of discriminatory instructions. Derek's response was devastating in its simplicity. Sir, systematic discrimination doesn't require written policies. It requires corporate culture that views disabled customers as problems to be managed rather than people to be served. That culture was created and maintained by TechWorld's management structure. James Mitchell took the stand that afternoon, his corporate Polish intact despite 3 weeks of legal pressure. As regional director, he represented TechWorld's institutional authority and its defense against systematic discrimination charges. Morgan's examination focused on corporate training materials, performance metrics, and the verbal instructions Derek had described. Mitchell's responses followed the careful script of corporate damage control, acknowledgement of individual failure, denial of systematic bias, promises of improved training protocols. Mr. Mitchell, did you ever instruct store managers to discourage disabled customers? Absolutely not. TechWorld's policy has always been full compliance with ADA requirements and equal service for all customers. Yet multiple witnesses have testified about verbal instructions to avoid difficult customers and special situations. How do you explain this discrepancy? Mitchell's pause lasted long enough to signal uncertainty. Individual managers may have misinterpreted guidance about customer service excellence. Any discrimination was contrary to company values and unauthorized by corporate policy. Judge Hawthorne's next question carried the weight of judicial skepticism. Mr. Mitchell, if these were unauthorized interpretations, why wasn't corrective action taken when discrimination incidents occurred at multiple locations? Your Honor, we weren't aware of systematic issues until this investigation began. We're committed to addressing any training deficiencies the court identifies. Morgan's follow-up revealed the calculated nature of TechWorld's discrimination strategy. Mr. Mitchell, did corporate conduct regular compliance audits regarding disability accommodations? We conducted general customer service evaluations. That's not what I asked. Did you specifically audit ADA compliance? Another pause. Not as a separate protocol, no. So, a company serving thousands of customers daily in an industry with known accessibility challenges never specifically evaluated its compliance with federal disability law. We relied on manager training and incident reporting. Incident reporting from the same managers you'd trained to view disabled customers as potential problems? Mitchell's corporate composure finally cracked. That characterization is unfair and inaccurate. Judge Hawthorne's expression suggested she found the characterization quite accurate indeed. The day's final testimony came from Maria Santos, the disability rights advocate whose organization had documented similar discrimination patterns across Denver's retail sector. Her presentation of community impact data transformed Jim's individual case into a broader civil rights issue. Ms. Santos, based on your organization's research, how common is the type of discrimination Mr. Carter experienced? Unfortunately, it's epidemic. Our surveys show that 67% of disabled individuals in the Denver metro area have experienced retail discrimination in the past year. Most never file complaints because they assume nothing will change. As court recessed, Derek Walsh found himself surrounded by disability rights advocates expressing gratitude for his testimony. Elena Vasquez approached with a quiet thank you that carried more weight than any corporate commendation he'd ever received. Jim Carter waited by the courthouse steps, Cooper alert beside him, as late afternoon traffic created the familiar urban symphony. When Derek emerged, he approached with the careful humility of someone who understood that apologies were proven through actions rather than words. Mr. Carter, tomorrow, Judge Hawthorne will hear closing arguments. Whatever she decides, I want you to know that testifying truthfully was the first genuinely right thing I've done in months. Jim's response was quiet but definitive. Derek, redemption isn't a single act. It's a lifetime commitment to being better than you were. Today was a good start. Cooper's tail wagged once. Apparently service dogs approved of humans who chose accountability over self-preservation. The legal machinery ground toward conclusion, but the human transformation it had catalyzed was just beginning. The legal machinery ground toward conclusion, but the human transformation it had catalyzed was just beginning. Judge Patricia Hawthorne entered her chambers at dawn, carrying coffee and the weight of a decision that would affect thousands of disabled Americans. The Carter vs. TechWorld case had evolved beyond simple discrimination litigation into a test of corporate accountability. At 8 a.m., TechWorld's attorney Martin Brennan requested an emergency conference. "Your Honor, my client wishes to explore settlement discussions before closing arguments." Judge Hawthorne studied him with judicial skepticism. "What's changed since yesterday's testimony?" "Your Honor, my client recognizes that continued litigation may not serve anyone's interests. They're prepared to discuss comprehensive remedial measures." The settlement conference revealed TechWorld's genuine fear of adverse ruling. Their offer was substantial: monetary compensation for Jim, funding for disability rights organizations, mandatory company-wide ADA training, and federal oversight for 3 years. "Mr. Carter," Judge Hawthorne asked, "do you wish to consider this settlement?" Jim's response reflected weeks of contemplation. "Your Honor, I filed this complaint because what happened to me was wrong, and because I suspected it was happening to others. If this settlement prevents similar discrimination and creates genuine accountability, it serves justice better than continued litigation." Derek Walsh, attending as a cooperating witness, raised an unexpected concern. "Your Honor, policy changes without cultural transformation won't prevent future discrimination. The settlement should include employee protections for reporting violations." His suggestion carried the weight of insider knowledge and personal redemption. The final agreement included whistleblower protections, recognition programs for inclusive service, and advancement preferences for employees, demonstrating disability accommodation commitment. Judge Hawthorne's formal acceptance came with federal warnings. "TechWorld Electronics, this agreement represents your commitment to fundamental change. Violation will result in resumed federal oversight and potential criminal referral." The courthouse steps hosted an impromptu press conference, transforming Jim from private citizen to reluctant civil rights advocate. "I hope this establishes that disabled Americans deserve the same respect and service as anyone else," he told reporters. "I hope it demonstrates that discrimination has consequences." Dr. Lisa Park stood beside him, their relationship having evolved through shared advocacy into something deeper: mutual respect, genuine affection, and the intimacy of fighting important battles together. Derek Walsh watched from the plaza's edge, no longer part of TechWorld, but permanently changed. His brother David had traveled from Colorado Springs to witness the settlement. "You did the right thing," David said with characteristic directness. "It took you a while, but you got there." Elena Vasquez returned to work that evening with new understanding of her power and responsibility. Her first customer was a woman, using a walker, who'd been hesitant to enter. "Welcome to TechWorld," Elena said with genuine warmth. "How can I help you today?" The war for accountability had concluded with victory, measured not in corporate destruction, but in systematic change, affecting thousands of disabled Americans who would benefit from Jim Carter's courage without ever knowing his name. Justice had arrived through building better systems rather than dramatic satisfaction. Justice had arrived through building better systems rather than dramatic satisfaction. 6 months later, Jim Carter stood in TechWorld's Park Meadows location, Cooper at his side, watching Elena Vasquez complete her final shift before nursing school. The store's transformation was subtle but profound: wider aisles, better lighting, and staff who approached disabled customers naturally. "Mr. Carter," Elena said, approaching with confident warmth, "I wanted to thank you before I leave. The scholarship fund made nursing school possible." "You earned that opportunity when you chose truth over convenience," Jim replied. "You'll be an excellent nurse." She knelt to scratch Cooper's ears. "Take care of him, Cooper. He's one of the good ones." Marcus Johnson, whose testimony had strengthened the federal case, approached professionally. "How can I help you today?" "I need a tablet for my nephew's video editing projects." The interaction felt normal, exactly what Jim had wanted from the beginning. Lisa Park waited in the store's coffee section, reviewing applications for the Disability Accommodation Training Program TechWorld now funded. 3 Fortune 500 companies requesting ADA compliance audits, she reported as Jim joined her. Your case created a market for doing the right thing. Their relationship had evolved through shared advocacy into genuine partnership, mutual respect, common values, and the intimacy of fighting important battles together. Derek Walsh had found purpose training businesses about disability accommodation. His first workshop was scheduled for next week, attended by retail managers, learning to see disabled customers as people rather than problems. Elena started her nursing program with scholarship support and unwavering determination. Her first patient would receive care from someone who understood advocacy's importance. The settlement's real victory wasn't measured in corporate punishment, but in systematic change. Thousands of disabled Americans would shop, work, and live with greater dignity because one veteran and his service dog had refused to accept discrimination as inevitable. Cooper's tail wagged as they left the store, tablet purchased without incident. Justice, it turned out, looked remarkably like ordinary respect. Cooper's tail wagged as they left the store, tablet purchased without incident. Justice, it turned out, looked remarkably like ordinary respect. 1 year after the settlement, Jim Carter stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Denver Law School, delivering the annual civil rights lecture to students who would soon enter the legal profession. Cooper lay beside the podium, with practiced calm, accustomed to academic environments where his presence sparked curiosity rather than confrontation. "The law," Jim told the audience, "is only as effective as the people willing to enforce it. My case against TechWorld succeeded not because discrimination was unprecedented, but because ordinary people chose accountability over convenience." In the front row, Ryan Carter beamed with pride at his uncle's transformation from private citizen to reluctant public advocate. Now a senior in high school, Ryan had channeled his experience managing Jim's media attention into plans for studying communications and disability rights advocacy. Dr. Lisa Park watched from the faculty section, her engagement ring catching auditorium lights. Their wedding was planned for spring, a ceremony Cooper would attend in his dual role as service dog and ring bearer, though they hadn't yet figured out the logistics of that particular honor. The question and answer session revealed how deeply the case had resonated with young lawyers. A second-year student asked about corporate compliance. "Professor Carter, has TechWorld maintained the changes required by the settlement?" "They have, and exceeded them in several areas," Jim replied. "But more importantly, their competitors have voluntarily adopted similar policies to avoid federal scrutiny. Sometimes the threat of accountability proves as effective as accountability itself." Derek Walsh occupied a back corner seat, no longer the corporate manager who'd initiated this cascade of events, but someone transformed by confronting his own capacity for harm. His disability accommodation consulting business had grown beyond individual retail training to include healthcare systems, educational institutions, and government agencies. His brother David sat beside him, wearing the TechWorld employee badge he'd earned 6 months earlier. The company's commitment to hiring people with disabilities had created opportunities David had never imagined possible: meaningful work, economic independence, and colleagues who valued his contributions rather than merely tolerating his differences. Elena Vasquez attended virtually from her nursing program clinical rotation, where she was completing requirements to become a rehabilitation nurse specializing in veteran care. Her scholarship had funded not just education, but purpose, helping other injured service members navigate systems that too often viewed disability as limitation rather than different ability. After the lecture, Jim and Lisa walked across campus. Toward their car, Cooper navigating evening foot traffic with the fluid expertise that made his work nearly invisible. Students parted naturally around them, some recognizing the famous service dog from news coverage, others simply making space for a working animal. "Any regrets?" Lisa asked as they reached the parking garage. Jim considered the question seriously. The past year had brought unwanted celebrity, legal complexity, and the constant pressure of representing causes larger than his individual experience. But it had also brought systematic change, personal growth, and a relationship built on shared values rather than convenient attraction. About filing the complaint? None. About becoming a public figure? He smiled, feeling Cooper's steady presence beside him. "Ask me again after the wedding, when we're hopefully back to being private citizens who happen to care about justice." Cooper's tail wagged once. Apparently service dogs approved of humans who chose love and accountability in equal measure. The war that began with one act of discrimination had concluded with countless small victories. Policies changed, attitudes shifted, and systems reformed. Most importantly, it had proven that ordinary people possessed extraordinary power to create the change they wanted to see. Justice indeed looked remarkably like ordinary respect, multiplied across thousands of daily interactions between human beings who'd learned to see dignity rather than disability. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.